Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Morning Pit, where you get your day started right here. Get you going. Nothing gets you going like the Morning Pit right here in the morning on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Coming to the end of the week. The weeks just fly by. I feel like yesterday was just Monday or Tuesday, and now here we are already almost to game day on Saturday. Of course, by the time we get to the Morning Pit tomorrow, the Friday Morning Pit, we'll still be like 36 hours away from the game. That late night start, 8 p.m. against Georgia Tech at Acrisure Stadium. And we got a lot to talk about with that game. We'll break down that game a lot tomorrow on the Morning Pit. You know, we do these Morning Pit episodes every day, Monday through Friday, every morning. Just Pitt talking points, things to talk about, things to discuss, things we're thinking about, things I'm thinking about, things you might be thinking about, Pitt related. Yesterday we talked a lot of basketball. Jeff Capel and his new plan, his new approach for Pitt hoops in this 2022-2023 season. Let's see if it works. Who knows? Tomorrow we're going to have a lot, and earlier in the week we looked around what happened in the Coastal Division last week and kind of where things stand in that regard, and wrapped up we talked about Pitt's offensive identity, just different topics and themes every day. And tomorrow we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this Pitt Georgia Tech game, as well as looking around at other games you need to pay attention to throughout the country, right here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And so you'll definitely want to watch for that. But today, I figured, it's September 29th. I mean, tomorrow will be the final day of September. But like I said, I want to spend tomorrow's show kind of previewing the weekend. So I thought today we can kind of take a look back at September and just sort of recap everything that's happened over the last, 4 weeks since September 1st, which feels like a long time ago. I mean, it really does. You get to the end of the month and it sort of feels like it flew by. But if you turn the clock back to that September 1st, to that first night of the college football season, Pitt's game against West Virginia, the backyard brawl returning at Acrisure Stadium, it feels like a long time ago. And a lot has happened since then. And so I thought we could take this episode here of the Morning Pit and just kind of recap what the last month has been. And maybe we'll do that every at the end of every month, just sort of recap all the things and just sort of go over everything that happened in the last month. Of course, like I say, we do these Morning Pit episodes every day at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can hit that subscribe button right down there to make sure you never miss any of our episodes. You subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on the alerts and the notifications, and you'll get it sent right to your phone. Hey, they just posted a new Morning Pit. Probably want to go check it out. You also get notifications when we go live for our Panther-Lair show, like we did last night at 8:30, and also when we go live after a game, which is really the one where I think it helps you to have the notifications turned on. Look, this game on Saturday night, I don't know what time we're going to start the postgame show. We're going to do a postgame show. We did it after the backyard brawl, and it started around 1:30 in the morning. We're going to do one after this game too. But I couldn't tell you, as we sit here on Thursday morning, I couldn't tell you what time that show is going to start. It's not going to be 12:30. It could be, it's going to be after 1 a.m. It's going to be 1:30, somewhere around there. And, I'll tweet it out. I'll say, hey, we're shooting for this time. Or, hey, we're going to get started at 1:45 or 1:20 or something like that. But the way to definitely know for sure is to have the alerts turned on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you'll get a notification so you know when we go live. So make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications. Now, as it relates to this month of September, I was kind of jotting down different things that happened in September. I mean, I hold up this paper, but really it's just this little section right here. No, up here. That is the stuff that we actually, that happened in September, and a little bit down here too. This is my organization system. I have another one here. And this is what gets me through the week as we produce different content on Panther-Lair.com. It's very organized. It's all put together. I have spreadsheets and things like that too, but this is the heart of it. And this just sits right on the desk, and whenever I need to write something down, I just, I want to do that. Oh, that's a good stat. Hey, here's West Virginia and Tennessee run pass splits for Pitt. And Western Michigan and Rhode Island down there. And then kind of breaking down all those things. Anyway, we'll go through my notes and organization another time. But as I was jotting down things that happened in the month of September, and I kind of turned the clock back to September 1st. Obviously, there was the backyard brawl, and that was the big thing that happened that day. But something else happened that day, and we probably haven't talked enough about it. I mean, to be honest, I think we probably should be talking more about it. And that was Pitt got a commitment that night. And really, Pitt got a commitment back in June, and the recruit just didn't announce it until that night. But it was Jordan Bass, linebacker from Virginia, Phoebus High School in Hampton, Virginia, committed to Pitt. And like I say, I don't think we're talking enough about this. He's 6'3", 200, 205. He plays strong safety and wide receiver at his high school, Phoebus. He'll be an outside linebacker for Pitt. And he, I think, is arguably, I mean, he might be the number one recruit in this class. You know, I mean, we can talk about this in a second because they got another commitment and we can kind of talk about the whole class. But Jordan Bass is a stud. He was really a stud. You look down the commitment or the offer sheet, you know, Power 5 schools. He had Boston College, Duke, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Penn State, South Carolina, Syracuse, Vanderbilt, Virginia, Virginia Tech. I'm surprised West Virginia wasn't in that mix as well. Virginia Tech was his other official visit. The Hokies wanted to land him. They were unsuccessful in those efforts, and it's not a lack of effort. They worked very hard to try and land Jordan Bass. Even after he, you know, told the coaches he was committing in June, they continued pushing for him very hard over the course of the summer, and probably have continued those efforts now even through September, and likely will all the way through to signing day in December. But Jordan Bass stood with that sort of silent commitment over the summer and made it public on September 1st. And like I say, he plays wide receiver and strong safety at his school. And right now, Phoebus is off to a 4-0 start. They've allowed exactly 6 points all season. That's not 6 points per game. That's 6 points all season, with Bass playing a strong safety role in what looks to be kind of like a 4-2-5 defense. Seems to be how they play. I mean, you could call it a 4-3 with one of the linebackers split out over the slot, but it's mostly sort of a 4-2-5 alignment. And Jordan Bass is playing strong safety as well as wide receiver. And at wide receiver, he has scored 10 touchdowns, 10 offensive touchdowns this season. He's got 2 interceptions on defense, and one of those he took back for another touchdown. So he's actually gotten into the end zone 11 times. He is playing at a really, really high level. And when you watch his film from these first 4 games, it reminds you a little bit of Solomon DeShields, who, you know, I think DeShields is starting to come on this season and make his presence known, and I think he's going to be a playmaker for this defense for the next couple seasons. But he was the same kind of guy, a guy who played wide receiver in high school, also played defense, but showed his athleticism with how he played on offense. And I think Bass might actually be a little bit more athletic than Solomon DeShields was coming out of high school, which is impressive. He looks like a freak, you know, at his size, with his physical style of play and then his athleticism. He looks like a stud right now. And he looks like, as I say, maybe the best recruit in Pitt's class. You know, Pitt's commitment class of 2023. They currently stand with 19 commitments. Now that everybody has finally been announced, and we'll get to the other guy who hadn't been announced because they came into September with 2 unannounced commitments, 2 guys who had committed to the coaches but hadn't made those commitments public yet. Jordan Bass was the first. Like I say, he committed in June and then announced it on September 1st. But as you run down this class of 19, you know, I think there are a few guys that really stand out as potentially being the best prospects in the class. I think that Isaiah Neal, the defensive tackle from Baltimore, from St. Francis Academy, looks like he's got a really high ceiling as sort of that maybe the next in line of those smaller, I shouldn't say small, he's like 6'3", 270, but smaller defensive tackles who are more athletic and can move. You know, we've seen a run of those guys come through Pitt, different sizes, but generally fitting that description, all the way back to Mick Williams, or even before him, like a guy like Tyree Young. But I mean, you look at Mick Williams, and obviously through Aaron Donald, Jalen Twyman, now Kalijah Cansey, and I think Isaiah Neal profiles to be that same type of player. I think Bryce Pollock, defensive back from Georgia, Shiloh High School, has been really good. He's got a couple interceptions this season. He's playing on offense as well. I was just looking at Pollock's stats. He's broken up 3 passes and he has 2 picks in 5 games this year. He's averaging about 5 tackles per game, playing as a defensive back. I wanted to see one other stat on Pollock. He's scored 2 touchdowns. He has a 42-yard run. He had a handoff that he took for 42 yards. He's got 2 receiving touchdowns on like 5 catches. He's a really good athlete, and I think a really good defensive back, one of the top guys in this class. I think Kenny Minchey, the quarterback, is one of the top prospects in this class, which is always something you'd like to see, as well as Lamar Seymour, the wide receiver from Florida. We spent so much time talking about Hakeem Williams, and he is certainly something that happened in September as well. We'll get to Williams in a second. But Lamar Seymour, I think, is a stud at Miami Central High School, and one of the better receiver prospects in the state of Florida. But Jordan Bass, though, I think you could put at the top of the list as arguably the number one overall recruit in this class. He's not rated as such, but I think when you watch his film, when you talk to coaches and analysts and scouts, I think you might find a consensus that Bass just very well may be number one. And so when we talk about things that happened in September, some of the things that stood out this month, I mean, I think Jordan Bass's commitment is a hell of a way to start, because it was a hell of a way to start the month. And so right off the bat in September 1st, they get a commitment from a guy who might be the top prospect in the class. Because he's big, he's athletic, and he's physical. And that's a heck of a combination. The days of recruiting fullbacks to play linebacker, they're not completely over. You're still going to find those guys, but for the most part, I think you're going to see, you are seeing, it's not like you're going to see, I'm not telling the future here. What you are seeing is more and more guys who are playing wide receiver, as sort of a bigger receiver, like a Jordan Bass 6'3", 205 type of guy. They're playing strong safety. And those are the guys that are ending up playing linebacker just because of the demands that are placed on linebackers in college football these days. That you can't just be a run-stopping thumper out there who occasionally has to, get in the face of a tight end. You've got to be able to get out and cover. You've got to be able to play in space. You've got to be able to run. And Jordan Bass can do all those things. I think he is an absolute stud, and I think he's going to be really, really good at Pitt. And then the other commitment this month was a little bit later in the month, I think on the 24th, Dadron Zipperer. He's a wide receiver from Lakeland, Florida, committed to Pitt, had kind of a varying group of finalists along the way. He took official visits to Central Florida right before he went to Pitt, took an official visit to South Florida as well. Those were kind of his top schools. South Carolina in the mix, Utah in the mix. I want to see other Power 5 schools that he had. Maybe that was the list, but Dadron Zipperer is a guy who I think kind of like his teammate Shadarian Harrison at Lakeland High School in Florida. Both of these guys, you watch their film, and it's not hard to envision this guy 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and you're saying, how did this guy get away from the state of Florida? How did this guy get away from Florida, Florida State, and Miami? How did this guy not get recruited and pursued by the big three in the state of Florida? And you see guys like that every year. And sometimes they're at a school like Pitt or West Virginia or Minnesota or whatever. And sometimes they're at, Georgia Southern, or they're at Florida A&M, or they're at UCF or some, a school like that, Arkansas State or something like that. And you say, how did this guy get away? And it's because there are just so many of these well-built, really athletic playmakers in the state that, first of all, you sometimes it can be hard to find them. There's just so many of them. And if you're in a place like Lakeland, which is more in the Tampa side of the state rather than the Miami side of the state, the Atlantic side of the state, a little closer to the Gulf Coast, so you're not necessarily in that high target area of the Miami-Dade area, Fort Lauderdale, but also just there's only so many guys that Florida, Florida State, and Miami can take, and Georgia and Alabama and all the other schools. This is why everybody recruits Florida. This is why everybody tries to recruit Florida, everybody east of the Mississippi tries to recruit Florida because there's just so many dudes. And, Dadron Zipperer, I think, is one of them. And you watch his film, he's a playmaker. He's scoring 40-yard touchdowns, 50-yard touchdowns, kind of on the regular. It's sort of a habit for him, and he's got that skill set that, like I say, when he gets to college, you say, how did this guy get away? He's got that potential. And so now, you've seen guys like that didn't necessarily pan out. Shockey Jacques Louis would be one of them, although I think he's having a nice season at Akron, it looks like. But you'll take those guys over and over and over again to, because the talent and the skills, it's just too enticing. You're not going to pass on a player like that. And so they added Dadron Zipperer, And that gives them actually 4 wide receivers in the class. Zipper goes along with Kenny Johnson, who is the first wide receiver to commit. Zion Fowler was the first wide receiver to commit. He committed last October. But Fowler and then Kenny Johnson from York, Pennsylvania, Dallastown High School committed over the summer. And then, like I mentioned, Lamar Seymour from the Florida area committed as well this summer. There's 4 wide receivers in a class. That's a big class of wide receivers. I don't know if all those guys will stick in this class. I think you can probably expect to see Pitt sign 3, either from one guy choosing to look elsewhere or being encouraged to look elsewhere. I'm guessing they'll probably sign 3 of those 4 guys. But either way, I think it's a good class, and it's a good receiver class to kind of rebuild the ranks there, where I think they're going to need some guys to be ready to step up sooner rather than later down the line. As far as Bass, he's actually I think the 3rd linebacker in this class. Jordan Bass, along with Braylon Lovelace from Leechburg and Rasheem Biles from Ohio. Just want to make sure I'm not missing a linebacker here. So this is actually a good indication of what the linebacker recruiting looks like nowadays. I said, the days of recruiting a fullback to play linebacker are kind of over or waning. When you look down the Rivals commitment list, all right, I'm looking at Pitt's commitment list on Rivals right now. Jordan Bass listed as a DB. Braylon Lovelace actually listed as a linebacker. And then Rasheem Biles listed as an athlete. And so if you just look at Pitt's commitment class right now, they have 1 linebacker. The reality, according to how their positions are listed in the Rivals.com database, the reality is they have 3 linebackers committed. But because you need those athletic guys playing on the outside, and middle linebacker too, I mean, to be quite honest, it's not a surprise that some of these guys who are getting projected as wide receivers or DBs or just athletes end up playing linebacker at the next level. I think Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara both fit that mold. Shane Simon, I'd have to go back and look at his recruiting profile, but I mean, I think you see what types of players Pitt is trying to get to play linebacker, and I think this class right here, this 2023 recruiting class, fits, just sort of is a continuation of that as they continue trying to build it. You can even look at last year. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank on his name. The linebacker they signed last year out of New Jersey. This is terrible. This is bad reporting right here. Kyle Lewis. Kyle Lewis was another guy who was not. He played defense. I think he was mostly like a safety. He played a lot of offense, and he came in to play linebacker. Marquand Pope, who enrolled early, played defensive back, played safety at his high school in Texas. Obviously he had a medical issue, and his football career is over. But you see the mold for linebackers that Pitt is recruiting. And this class of 2023 with Jordan Bass and Braylon Lovelace and Rasheem Biles, it's fitting the mold. It's following in that path. All right, so that was on the recruiting front in the month of September. Football-wise, I mean, you know what happened. Pitt went 3-1. They opened the season with a win over West Virginia in the backyard brawl. Lost in overtime, close one to Tennessee. Also lost their starting quarterback in that game. Lost their backup quarterback in that game. Went out to Western Michigan and won with a pretty convincing rushing attack. And the third-string quarterback who hadn't played football in 3 years or hadn't played in a game in 3 years ended up putting up a pretty strong performance. And then they close it out by beating Rhode Island, an FCS team, by 3 touchdowns. And Izzy Abanikanda right now is the leading rusher in the ACC and one of the top 10 rushers, I think, in the country. So all in all, not a bad start. We talked earlier this week about offensive identity, and I think those questions still exist for this Pitt football team of what their offense actually is, who they really are, and what they do well. We've seen them run the ball well, mostly against Western Michigan and Rhode Island. Well, let's see once it gets into the ACC. And as you look around the ACC, the Coastal Division, not looking so hot. Not looking good at all, as a matter of fact. And the team that everybody thought was going to be good, Miami, because they finally had a real quarterback who was going to be good, and Tyler Van Dyke, neither one of those has been very good. Well, I mean, Van Dyke started the season okay, and then he got benched this past week against Middle Tennessee, a game that Miami inexplicably lost at home by 2 touchdowns. So now you're not so intimidated by Miami. You're not so worried about Tyler Van Dyke. You do have to make road trips to North Carolina and Louisville, but North Carolina looks kind of like what Virginia was last year, a pretty good offense and a really miserable defense, so like a defense that literally ranks in the bottom 10 or 15 in a number of categories nationwide. You're talking about 120, 110, 111, somewhere around there out of 131 teams. And then Louisville, I'm still trying to answer this question of when the last time a quarterback like Malik Cunningham really got over on Pitt. And since Pat Narduzzi arrived, and there might be that situation out there, but I'm still trying to remember it and track it down. I can't really remember what it was, so we'll see what we can figure out there. But those are your concerning road trips, North Carolina and Louisville, outside of that season-ending game at Miami. But as you run down this schedule, and I'm going to bring up a poll that I put on Twitter 2 days ago. I think I tweeted it, and it was simple. In the next 8 games, Pitt will go 5-3, 6-2, 7-1, or 8-0. And most people, like upwards of 70% of the people who vote, and it was like close to 2,000 votes. Upwards of 70% of those people chose either 7-1 or 8-0. And I have a lot of questions about this Pitt team. I don't know how good they are, but I also don't know how good they need to be, given the competition that lays ahead of them and what we've seen out of Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. Duke had a good start, 3-0, and then lost at Kansas, and you wonder if we've sort of seen the ceiling for that program at least this season. Syracuse is going to start the season 5-0, assuming they don't blow it against Wagner this weekend, but then the stretch after that, where they've got to play Wake Forest, Clemson, NC State, Florida State, Notre Dame, and Pitt, and I always forget there's one other in there. Anyway, they've got 6 really tough games coming up after this 5-0 start to the season. Where are they going to be after that? You know what I mean? Are they going to be at 7-4? Are they going to be at 6-5? Are they going to be at 5-6? Any of those are a real possibility, because Syracuse is still Syracuse until it proves that it's not Syracuse. And so you look down this stretch of 8 games, given what we saw out of Pitt in September, given what we saw out of those teams in September, and you say, boy, if you go 5-3 in those 8 games, that's pretty disappointing. 6-2 might even be disappointing. And the reality is, if you go 6-2 in those 8 games, you probably have like an 85 or 90% chance of winning the Coastal Division. Depending on who your 2 losses are, you have a very high percent. If you go 7-1, I would say you got to be like 99%, unless your one loss is the Miami in the finale, and they're also 7-0 going into that game. So, it's one of these things where it's not hard to go down this slippery slope of expectations for this team, even though I think we still have a lot of questions about this team. I think they can have a good passing attack. I think they can keep running the ball well. I think the defense can be pretty impactful. But we've seen evidence of each of those. I think we've seen each of those pieces sort of coming together at various points this season. But we've also seen holes in each of those areas of the team. And until we see it sort of consistently against ACC opposition, I can't fully commit to believing in it. But the rest of this schedule just looks so questionable and so vulnerable that it really is, it's not hard to talk yourself into thinking that anything less than 6-2 is a disappointment. So that's what the first month has told us about Pitt and the next 8 opponents. We'll see what we think at the end of October. We'll see if our opinions have changed completely. And then the final thing that came out of September, and this has sort of been a big deal, has been made of this week by Pitt. The fact that the Panthers have 4 teams ranked right now. All 4 of their fall sports, or 4 of their fall sports, football, men's soccer, women's soccer, and volleyball, are all ranked this week. Pitt, of course, is 24th in the Associated Press poll, 24th in the coaches poll too. The men's soccer program is 10th in the United Soccer Coaches poll. The women's soccer program is 14th. They're off to the best start in program history at 10-1 overall. And then the volleyball program, like clockwork, death, taxes, and Pitt volleyball, 10th in the AVCA coaches poll. They're 11-2 and 2-0. And when you see something like this, it's a testament to the strength of the athletic department. I mean, if you have this many programs succeeding at this level at the same time, it certainly makes it look like the athletic department is very healthy and very strong. And I think I would agree with those sentiments. I think the athletic department is in a good place right now. What's funny, though, is as you run down those 4 programs, right, and you look at the head coaches who are guiding each of those programs, like Pat Narduzzi. Who hired Pat Narduzzi? Randy Jewell was the interim AD at that point, but Patrick Gallagher, the chancellor, ultimately led that charge. Jay Vidovich, men's soccer coach, was hired by Scott Barnes. Dan Fisher, the volleyball coach, was hired by Steve Peterson. Actually, you go all the way back to 2013 for that one. And then you have Randy Waldrum, the women's soccer coach, who was hired by Heather Lyke. And I don't say this as a way to take away anything from the current athletic department administration or athletic department leadership. All right. My point is, I mean, first of all, it's just sort of interesting that all 4 of these coaches who are currently the most successful at the university, the coaches that have 4 programs ranked all at the same time, which has only happened twice before in school history. And both of those instances were in 2020, when we've all sort of decided collectively as a society that things just didn't really count or happen. So for all intents and purposes, this is the first time during a non-pandemic that Pitt has had 4 fall sports ranked at the same time. And it's a curiosity that each of the coaches leading these 4 teams was hired by a different athletic director. Now, I do think there's something to be said for the current leadership of the athletic department. The director of athletics, Heather Lyke, the support she has given to her head coaches, the support that has come from lower campus, from Patrick Gallagher, the Cathedral of Learning, all the suits on Bigelow Boulevard, as it were. The support behind athletics is virtually unprecedented, and I don't think that can be said enough. And I don't think that point can be stressed enough, that it's virtually unprecedented, the support from lower campus. And I think Heather Lyke has done a good job translating that into supporting her head coaches. And, major credit to her for Randy Waldrum. The Randy Waldrum hire, like I say, 10-1 overall for the Pitt women's soccer team, is the best start in program history. 3-0 in the ACC is tied for the program's best start in conference play, I think, since joining the ACC. And so it's all, I think, a sign of health, of strength, and all positive for the Pitt athletic department. Now, what's funny is there's one other school in the country, and you know this because you read it in Pitt's press release, that there's one other school in the country that has 4 teams ranked right now. Now, you wouldn't know from Pitt's press release who that other school is, but there is one other school in the country. Now, sort of along those same lines, there was a tweet that came out yesterday from the Penn State athletics Twitter account about how Penn State has 5 teams in the country ranked right now: football, men's soccer, women's soccer, volleyball, and field hockey. And in Penn State's tweet, it said something like, one of only 2 schools in the country to have this many, have 4 or more teams ranked at the same time, and we're not number 2 or something like that. And it's just so funny, this Penn State, like, they refuse to name each other. And there's no reason Pitt should be doing advertisements for Penn State any more than there is a reason for Penn State to be doing advertisements for Pitt. But, I mean, come on, guys. It's silly to even say there's only one other school. Like, either say who it is or just leave it out altogether and just point out your own accomplishments and stop worrying about anybody else. It'd be great if they just did like the handshake emoji or something like that. Good job, or Pennsylvania represent or something. No, we have to carry on the Penn State rivalry and refuse, to mention he who must not be named or she who must not be named, as the case may be. It just cracks me up. I laugh about it sometimes with some of these things. But either way, back to the point. Pretty good spot for Pitt to be in, to have 4 programs ranked right now. All those programs look healthy. Men's soccer is really on the rise. Women's soccer is on the rise. Volleyball stays on the rise. And Pitt football obviously is poised to potentially build on its success from last season. So if you're a Pitt fan and you're constantly bemoaning the state of Pitt athletics, and you certainly will the first time Pitt has a drive that leads to a punt on Saturday night. But if you're a Pitt fan and you're constantly sort of down on Pitt athletics or wondering when Pitt athletics will ever be good, I mean, they're good right now. Pitt athletics is pretty good right now. So you got that going for you, which is nice. All right. You also have the Morning Pitt going for you, which I tend to think is pretty nice right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. You will always get an alert when we release a new video. Like this video also. Hit that like button. I really appreciate it. It makes me feel good, and it makes YouTube like us even more. So hit the like button when you watch these Morning Pitt videos, and then skedaddle over to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. We have it all, in addition to message boards where you can talk with other Pitt fans about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Morning Pitt here on Thursday morning. We got one more for you, and that's going to be tomorrow when we tell you everything you need to know heading into the weekend. Everything for Pitt, Georgia Tech, everything around the Coastal Division, everything around the country that you need to pay attention to as it relates to Pitt, their chances in the ACC, and where they'll be ranked on Monday, assuming they beat Georgia Tech on Saturday night, which you can't take anything for granted. But you never know. You never know what's going to happen. But if they win, what games do you need to pay attention to that could affect their ranking? So we're going to have lots to talk about tomorrow for sure, but I appreciate you tuning in today. So have a great rest of the Thursday. We will talk to you Friday morning for the final Morning Pit of the week right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.